Greetings and welcome once again to Neurologic. I'm your host, Leo Jones. It's once again the winter holiday season, the time of year where candles are lit, yuletide carols are loudly blared from stores across the country, trees are decorated, and gifts exchanged with those we cherish. It is a truly unique time of year. Speaking of gifts, it has been said that finding one for us autistics is difficult. Well, in the spirit of the season, I've decided to bestow upon you, dear listener, a few tips, namely, gifts not to give the autistic person in your life. Now, not all of these will apply specifically to the autistic individual you know. Some autistics may actually request an item or two on this list. In that case, their personal desire overrides any critique made here. As the saying goes, your mileage may vary. Let's begin. Number 5. Fidget spinners and fidget cubes. You may have heard or seen these earlier this year. While both have been in existence since the 90s, their popularity surged into the mainstream after they became trendy and a rapidly selling fad. They were originally designed to assist children and adults with focus issues, including those with autism and ADHD, among other conditions, but have been seen in the hands of nearly everyone since May. An inexpensive, lightweight portable item that was made for autistics. What could be better as a gift? Well, let's start with how a gift like this comes across. Fidget spinners and cubes may be classified as toys, but they have a specific purpose: to help those who have trouble focusing, being easily distracted, or staying on task. By giving this as a gift, you're telling the person that they have a deficit that you think needs to be addressed. It's somewhat akin to gifting someone acne medication or shampoo. It sends a message that you think something is wrong with that person. Number 4. Goods from businesses that employ autistics but are not run by autistics. You may have seen or heard about such places this year: bakeries, cupcakeries, and other treat companies that wrap their product with an air of charity, declaring that their items are either made, packed, or delivered by autistic workers. There is little wrong with that, aside from the lack of full-time employment that seems to haunt the autistic community throughout their lives, except when selecting such products not based upon their quality or desirability by the autistic person to whom you're giving, but because said product involved an autistic hand in its creation. Think about that for a minute. Would you give a gift card to a Mexican restaurant to your neighbors who immigrated from Spain? How about a bottle of Stolichnaya to the Ukrainian family down the street? Or Jay-Z's most recent album, 444, to the Nigerian woman at work? Of course you wouldn't. And the same applies to not just autistics, but anyone with a disability as well. Also, if the product has a deliberate and distinct sense of smell, noise, or feel, it can wreak havoc on those of us with sensory issues, which will add to the obvious, that you gave a gift to feel better about yourself, but failed to take an actual interest in the person to whom you're giving. Number 3. Anything with a puzzle piece logo. For decades, charity-based nonprofit organizations run by neurotypicals to benefit autistics have used the puzzle piece logo in a multitude of ways, from marketing to fundraising to disturbing ad campaigns stressing awareness, so much so that the penultimate symbol for autism is the blue puzzle piece. Of course, we as autistics didn't get a choice or even a voice in the matter, and over the past decade we've seen an explosion of puzzle piece merchandise available for purchase. Shirts, hats, socks, belts, keychains, keyboards, computer mice, cell phone cases, watch bands, purses, wallets, lampshades, car shades, etc., etc. As autistics, with the rapid rise in puzzle piece products, we have become aware of a notorious notion that those who wear and or own a significant number of these products are most likely neurotypical, but know someone who's autistic. Contrary to popular culture, most autistics despise the puzzle piece logo, mainly because it was created and aggressively spread by an organization with a very healthy supply of cash and almost non-existent representation of autistics among their boards, not to mention their bigoted, discriminatory, and downright disdainful way they portrayed us. So it's no surprise that giving something with a puzzle piece sticker slapped on it would be greeted with little enthusiasm and probably some contempt. Number 2. Self-help socialization books or manuals about autism, but written by neurotypicals. As with number 5 above, by gifting such a book, you're telling the person that they have a deficit that you think needs to be addressed. After all, nothing says, "Happy Holidays! Here's an obvious reminder that you're not like the rest of us and are not fitting in properly with neurotypical society." There are many books written by autistics out there for autistics. Authors like Leanne Holiday Willie, John Elder Robeson, Ian Ford, just to name a few. And I personally recommend Neurotribes by Steve Silberman, who has written an accurate and excellent history of the neurodiversity movement, despite being neurotypical. And finally, to number 1, To Siri with Love. Speaking of books, this should be avoided at all costs. If you're not familiar, To Siri with Love is a memoir written by Judith Newman, a neurotypical mother of her 13-year-old autistic son, Gus, who also describes herself as, quote, autism very friendly. This book, published this year, shares the story of how Apple's digital personal assistant Siri helped her son navigate a neurotypical world. I would describe more about it, but Kaylin Ryweall, an autistic mother, wrote it best in a piece for Bustle.com, and I'll share some excerpts here. For example, she describes, in one scene, while describing a family trip to a Disney resort, Newman writes that Gus looks, quote, completely insane in most of the photos, and that he, quote, left the evening babbling incoherently about villains, end quote. In other passages, she indicates she does not have a basic understanding of autistic traits, as evident in a scene in which she describes Gus's response to his twin, Henry, shouting, quote, Henry would start to shout, and then Gus would escalate with his own hysterical screaming for no reason whatsoever, since no one was even talking to him. Then he would run into his room and slam the door, and I'd have to follow him to make sure he hadn't passed out, because he would probably be also holding his breath. Kaylin Rabiel goes on. It is commonly known that many autistics do not respond well to loud noises. I cannot say for certain whether or not this is true for Gus, but in another passage, Newman writes that Gus, quote, hides in a closet, quote, during thunderstorms, which I believe serves as additional proof that he appears to suffer from some level of sound sensitivity. If so, I would disagree with her assertion that he is screaming for no reason. Another passage from Kaylin Rabiel's article in Bustle.com. In several passages, she writes that she worries Gus will become a parent and advocates for a strange course of action to ensure it doesn't happen. And she quotes from the book. I am still deeply worried about the idea that Gus could get someone pregnant and yet never be a real father, which is why I will insist on having medical power of attorney so that I will be able to make a decision about a vasectomy for him after he turns 18. She continues, Gus should not be a parent, not just because he's still shaky on the whole concept of where babies come from, but because the solipsism that is so much at the heart of autism makes him unable to understand that someone's needs and desires could ever be separate from his own, let alone more important. Kaylin actually writes in response to this, I do not speak for every autistic, and I do not know the details of Gus's life beyond what is shared in the book, but I am a well-educated, employed autistic parent of autistic kids, and it feels to me as though Judith Newman does not believe I am capable of handling my children. As a teenager, I wasn't much different from Gus. Yet, I'm here, and though I might not be considered successful by my neurotypical societal expectations, I manage. Throughout the book, she also shares personal information about Gus's fears and differences from the neurotypical norm in a way that I find incredibly disrespectful. There are pieces of information that Gus, and Gus only, should share with people he cares for, and only when he is comfortable enough to do so. So often, autistics are mocked for what makes us different. I believe that taking that power away from Gus is unconscionable. There's also other parts in this book that you should be aware of, where the author writes about her son, and I'm going to read a few quotes here. When I think of Gus in a sexual situation, it generally has a Benny Hill soundtrack, and anything with that music does not end well. However much I loved my son, I could not imagine that any girl anywhere would find him interesting at this point. Keep in mind, Gus is 13. Also, I want to understand what he's thinking. Is he thinking? these are just a few of the quotes. The book itself is quite offensive and is very regressive as far as autism is concerned. Gus is verbal, and yet presumed by his own parent that his future self needs not only 24/7 care, but a vasectomy. I mean, she's walked back that statement now, of course, and in the book you can see her walk it back as well, but it will be forever in print that she considered a vasectomy for her child. Julie Newman and her book, To Surrey with Love, exemplify the fact that many parents fail to realize that autistic children, especially their own, will eventually grow up with continuing development, learning, and experience. Instead, the child is treated less like an individual human being and more like, well, a pet. A pet you have to neuter, restrain, and control. In response to criticism of her book, she retorted that, quote, "This book really wasn't written for an autistic audience. It was written for parents, neighbors, people who may love and hopefully will work with someone who is on the spectrum." In response to that, while I could give my own complete response about how horrible that retort is, I'm going to read a recent post written by Nico Boskovic, a nonverbal autistic teenager who you may have heard of in the news when he was initially denied a trip he had won to the UN based upon an essay he had wrote in May of this year. So here's what Nico writes. "No one, and I mean no one, should be talking about what's best for me, besides me. Yes, my parents know me best in the world, but that doesn't mean they know better. It perplexes me that we are having this debate still, and people don't see how ludicrous it is to have an autistic group represented by non-autistic. Imagine the NAACP represented by whites. Recall that image of a group of white men signing legislation limiting women's birth control. Yet it is totally okay for many autistics to be affected by the will of neurotypicals. I simply say this. If you want the views of nonverbal autistics to be heard, invite them to the table. Make sure they can access the meeting with the support they need. Seek out autistic people who are nonverbal and listen to what they have to say. Let your experience of how you raised a person who is autistic be shadowed by the autistic person's experience of not fitting in a world that thinks he is broken. Right now, the biggest hurdles we face are the attitudes of community members and the imposed limits of parents. Let yourself abstain from the pity party that seems to be so much a part of the autism community, and believe that your child will continue to develop and gain new skills. Most of all, give them the chance to have what we each aspire to: an independent life, love, housing that supports their vision of what they want, a chance to work, make a decent living, and find satisfaction in their daily life. Besides that, they want to be accepted for who they are, or know that if they need support, they can get it. For me, this is what our research dollars should be spent on. Please don't purchase this book. It perpetrates stereotypes, myths, and the disabling narrative that autistics don't grow up, get jobs, become parents, or even live on their own. As I stated earlier, there are so many other books to choose from that are so much better. So at this point, I'm sure some of you are wondering, well, what should I get this person as a gift? A great way to determine that would be to simply ask them. If that doesn't appeal to you because you want it to be a surprise, I understand that. I get it. That's kind of the thrill of the holidays, is you don't know exactly what you might get from someone if they are giving you a gift. So ask them for a list of 3 or so items, or ask them about their favorite subjects, interests, what fascinates them, what they want to learn more about. Pick from any of those things and you're bound to find a gift that works great. You know, a new supply of medium if they're an artist, tools for others who build or like to disassemble things to find out how they work. Even reference materials are all respectful gift ideas. Above all, the best gift you can render to the autistic in your life is acceptance, recognition of who they truly are, and how they wish to be perceived and identified. It's rare to find, but something we've been fighting for all our lives. A sincere happy holidays to all of you, and thank you so much for listening. I'm Leo Jones, and this has been Neurologic. Neurologic is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. To view a copy of this license, visit creativecommons.org/licenses/by-nc-nd/4.0 or send a letter to Creative Commons, P.O. Box 1866, Mountain View, California 94042, USA. Neurologic uses the song Furious Freak, created by Kevin MacLeod, for its intro and outro music. Visit him at incompetech.com. Furious Freak is licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0 license, creativecommons.org/licenses/by/3.0. You can reach Leo Jones and Neurologic by email at neurologicpodcast@gmail.com.